make sure I got this. So here's my coaching, my CV. I coached University of Colorado for 7 years as an assistant during a great time for Mama Bird Rabbits years. Coached Colorado Cutthroat with Phil for a couple years before getting the dream job. I got to coach Johnny Bravo for 6 years, and along the way coached the U23 national team twice, hoping to be able to coach it again for the next cycle. And they'll be announcing that soon. And helped out, I coached Fairview for 2 years. So I'm going to present some things that I've learned and things that I've done over the time at these different coaching gigs that I've found to be very productive and very helpful. So kind of presenting my experiences for you. And the first thing is that I love training. I love practices. And I use the word training rather than practice because it, to me, conveys something much more specific than practice. Where practice, you can practice anything. You can practice, you're rehearsing something. But training is preparing you for this dynamic style of play. And I believe that training is that engine of growth. And the one equation I like to use is that your skill growth is some multiplier of how much focused effort you give and a duration to that effort. And duration can also be proxied with reps. Repetition of a drill, doing it 5 times is much better than doing it once. We learn our skills by doing, and so you need to apply that focus for some amount of time to get better. And if you lack the focus or you lack the duration, you're not going to be able to progress those skills. And so we get to what I call the coaching paradox, and that's that the coach's knowledge is expressed in words. I have words and I'm going to convey those to my players. I'm going to try and get them to do things with my words, but all of our skills are learned by doing. And so if I were to lecture for 2 hours, my players would be no better players in any of their skills than if we had done nothing, right? It's only by doing things and doing them successfully do we actually build those skills and get better at them. And so the hard thing to learn as a coach is that players don't improve by hearing your words. And we love to talk, and I thought I was going to just dump knowledge into everyone's heads, and they were going to get everything that I knew into them, and they were going to be great players. And it doesn't work that way. And so I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've done to get away from my words and get more focused on getting my players to perform things successfully so that they can then build their skills. So the first thing I'm going to just kind of go through, I have a template for all of my practices. And for every practice that I've run, whether it's been with Johnny Bravo, the national team, back when we were doing Cutthroat, we did something a similar template. And now when I've done any volunteer coaching for teams, helped out Inception, they all run with this general template, and then I vary it past that. So I start with the dynamic warm-up. I go into speed ladders. I have a very specific box throwing drill, and the specifics of the drill aren't necessary, but we're ramping up and we're building some throwing skills at this point, and we're getting ourselves loose. Then I go into a lesson where I'm going to teach, and we're going to have, this is our patterns or drills. These are where we're building, and we're doing it without full resistance. We're not scrimmaging. We're not having defense in a lot of these drills. We're running through and we're learning to do things correctly. And this is the main part that I'm going to talk about. The other parts have aspects, but it's really the lesson and the theme for the day that we're trying to teach that day is what I'm going to focus on. After that, we get into small-sided competitions. And I'm a strong believer that you learn best by competing because you get positive feedback when you succeed at doing what you're trying to do right, by scoring and by winning games. And that's the best way. And you let pride drive people's effort. Their pride to want to succeed in a competition, to want to win, is enough to push them to be at their best, to provide enough focus that focus times duration, their focus is at the highest point where they're getting the most out of all of those reps. And then lastly, we end with the 7v7 games. And so all of that is based on a progression. It starts very slow and it builds to full field playing, right? Where you're playing at full intensity. And so I've found the best results when my training follows a few simple principles of progressions and build-up. I go from individual work to teamwork. We're doing stuff with our own bodies to start, and then we're incorporating more players into it until we get to a full 7-on-7. But we don't start with 7-on-7. Everyone focuses on their own individual self. That's where we're doing our dynamic, and our ladders are absolutely individual. The throwing adds one more element. We're going to add another player or two, but we're not working as a full team yet. We go from structured to unstructured. I provide very big restrictions in the drills that I'm running in those patterns, so that they have very specific things that I want them to do. I don't allow them to choose very often. I need you to make this cut. I want you to throw a fake on this throw. I want you to look this off, and I want you to throw the around throw on this, or maybe I want you to throw the inside. I'm going to give very specific things, and then I'm going to gradually loosen that and allow them to go to more unstructured. The real learning is going to be in the unstructured, but they're going to build the habits, the correct habits, by doing it with that structure. And if they can do it correctly with the structure, then you can remove some of the structure and see if they can still do it correctly. We go from a low work rate to a high work rate. You can see that it's very casual to begin dynamic and ladders. And at the end of that, I want them to have ramped up to game speed, where they're playing as fast and as intense as we expect them to play at a competition, at the semifinals, I like to say, of a tournament. That's the intensity that you want to get to build to. And from least game-like to most game-like. So early on in those, it might be a little contrived. A drill or a pattern that I'm going to run doesn't feel that much like a game. I'll give them some context. This is why we're doing this, but it's not like a game. But or I might restrict in a game. I might say that you only have 5 passes to score, or we have to, you can't score until you break a mark, or we get 2 points for breaking the mark upfield on the first throw, or whatever the constraint is. I can add constraints to an early game, and then I pull those constraints off to make it more game-like and more free-flowing. And I go from low pressure to high pressure. Low pressure meaning that there's very few things to think about. There's no defense. You have to do these things without the defense. And then I'm going to add a mark that maybe at half speed. They're not trying to get point blocks, but they're trying to simulate the movement. And then we're going to add in a live mark, where that person knows you're trying to get that disc off that sideline and is now playing more like it in that drill. And then we're going to put it into a game, fully high pressure. No longer do you know exactly what you need to do, but you have to pull knowledge from a lot of different areas and do each of those things right. You have to know to swing that disc in that flow of the game, not just because the drill said you're supposed to throw it to the guy on the opposite side of that field. And that goes along with the least fun to most fun. Players love to compete and play, and so they get to build towards that. And you also can get a lot of things done early on when they're more ready to do something that's dull or boring and get a lot out of it. You can do some throwing drills. You can do a lot of high rep things that are boring. And I stole this one from soccer, where I played indoor soccer for 5 years through high school, from junior high to high school, every winter, twice a week. And we'd show up at this gym, inner city Rochester, and you'd get a ball, and you were required to spend the first 10 minutes doing what are called corver drills. They're one single person drills where you're pulling a ball in a little triangle. You're doing a bunch of very scripted things, and they got us to do that for 10 minutes every day, and it was the most boring thing, but it built all of your fundamentals. And you can do the same thing with Ultimate. You can get a lot of very basic things, that the reps that you need to do to get better. You can get those in at the beginning without wearing out young people that want to just have fun, right? Working with some of the top teams, you don't have to worry about making it fun. They're there to try and get better and to win. But for high school, you have to make it fun at some point. But you can get in some not fun things at the beginning. You're not going to get much success with unfun things at the end, though. And my favorite rule is to quit before they want to quit. I love when they are like, one more game, and I'm like, no, practice is done. We hit our time. Great workout, great session today, but you got to wait till next week, and then they're chomping. But if you quit one game too late and they're going home, not feeling great about that day, or not feeling good, or overly exhausted, or they got injured, then it leaves a bad flavor on that day. So quit before they want to quit. And so the focus of this full talk is a theme. And every one of my practices, I've picked one theme. I have one thing that's going to bring all the different drills together. That's going to be that thread that pulls all of the different parts of my training session together, and allows me to keep from trying to shotgun all of my knowledge into them. It allows me as a coach to focus on just this thing. There's so much I want to teach them about playing defense, about changing their position, about adjusting the mark at different stall counts. But if today we're working on give-go moves, then I want to put all of that to the side and teach them how to run those handler give-go cuts. We want to pick one theme and choose only drills and games that are relevant to that theme. And then we find continuity. Every time I talk about my coaching with anyone that has an education background, they use the word scaffolding. You find continuity by scaffolding. You add something to it. You teach them something, and then you say, oh, and now we're going to add one more thing onto that. We're going to run this pattern that we're going to do, and now we're going to add another cutter, right? We had a great dump swing, and now we're going to have that continue cutter coming from downfield. But we can't do that continue cutter if we can't make that dump swing, if we can't complete those passes. So I might add, I can keep us focused by having a drill that works on that changing the point of attack and swinging the disc, and then build and add other skills on and get some variation by adding the skills. And the important part about this, about making that run well, and there's one caveat to that, is that if someone is doing something that hinders the practice from moving forward, then you might have to focus and help them. And with high school kids, you're going to have a few kids at times that are in their second practice, and you may need to give them attention off theme. But in general, as your team progresses, as you get to an A and a B team, and you're working with the A team, you really can probably provide that feedback in just that area. They're well-rounded enough that the practice will flow without you giving feedback in all of the other smaller criteria, all the things that aren't on your theme, and allow them as players to focus their minds on this one. And one of the important parts about this is that, about that feedback, is that any feedback that you give requires some amount of context. I have to take a player aside and say, Ethan, hey, when you were making that last cut, and he has to picture in his mind that situation, and we have to build up a way to talk about what I want to give him a correction on, and that takes time. And if I have a theme, and we've been sticking with that theme, say we've been trying to play out of a trap, off of a sideline, starting the offense from a trap, and that's our theme, then I've already set the stage with the first 30, 40 minutes of practice, so that when I get to correct Ethan about something on changing that, I don't have to set up why we're doing this. I don't have to set up the situation. I can give him more focused feedback and say, hey, this is what I wanted in that situation. And the message can be received and processed in a short, concise burst. And I'll get more to that. So this allows both the coach and the players to stay focused on that. And when we're not trying to change our mind's direction, and we're staying in a similar theme and it seems coherent, we're going to learn a lot better. There's a narrative and a story that goes along with building within that theme that allows players to keep their focus on those things, as long as you as a coach can keep them engaged and interested within that theme. And that was the last part. That previous discussions provide that context for the future feedback. So here are a few examples of things that I've run as practice. Attacking the open side, right? Getting us into the habit of relentlessly having someone cutting to that open side space and looking to beat the defense there, and continually saying, if they won't stop us, we're gonna attack that. Taking our shots from movement. So any deep hucks or very aggressive throws are most successful when we get those in motion before the mark is set. And so that's one. And each of these themes are not only a theme, but you can kind of think of these are things that are core principles of my team. And so early on, I may have a taking shots from movement practice that is very basic, but then I can reuse that theme later in the season and start at a more advanced place than I was and build onto it from there, because I'm going to repeat a theme throughout, or maybe change some of the drills in it, but keep the theme the same, so that there's some familiarity. When they come back and say, oh yeah, taking shots for movement, oh yeah, I remember some of that stuff. Some of the things will come back to them and you'll breeze through it. What took 30 minutes before takes 10 minutes, and now you're adding, and now you're increasing, you're building on that previous session of a theme. What I found is that from my own playing is when a practice is undirected and we don't have themes from them, I had a lot of difficulty tying things from one practice to another, because I was so scattered between what I was thinking about on the field, what I was worried about from one practice to the next. And it kind of relieves you from worrying about a lot of other things. I don't have to worry about whether they're going to critique my downfield defense if I'm making good reset cuts in our reset handler offense themed practice, right? I can not worry about being criticized or troubled about that, and I can really focus on building this other skill that I want. And the other thing is that we need variations within that theme, right? We need to keep varying them to keep players engaged. And there's a couple of ways that we can do it. One is that I try to have a limit to the number of drills that I'm going to run in a practice or in a season, really, because every drill, setting it up, takes a lot of time to set that context, getting people to understand what it is and why, what are the variations. And so I would rather find progressions within a drill. I want to start a drill, and then I want to change that drill. So rather than, if I'm going to do some patterns, and this is one thing that I do a lot, is movement around the field without defense. So it's just the offense trying to build habits about how the disc might flow throughout the course of a point. And so we'll set it up, and maybe we'll start on a sideline, and the first thing is he looks upfield, turns, throws a reset, and then he swings it. And when we start getting that, we add on. Maybe now, or I can vary it. Okay, I'm going to look upfield, and when I turn, instead of throwing that swing, he's going to go up line as if he's covered, and I'm going to hit him there. Or maybe I'm going to vary it again, and he's going to go up line, and I'm going to look him off, and now I'm going to hit the swing around to the next guy. And so I can get 3 different variations that all have the same player positions, that are all built on the same thing, and I can go from one to the next, and I can get 15 minutes of very good work over 3 variations, where I would have no chance to do 3 different drills, get all these kids moved into a different area, get them focused again, teach something else, and get them up to speed. That downtime in between drills is too much of a waste. So I like to find my progressions within that drill, and every drill that I come up with, I think, how can I vary it? How can I add complexity? How can I continue to teach a couple of different steps along the way, rather than we're going to run this drill, and then we're going to do a completely different drill that's an end zone, and then we're going to do a marking drill and bounce them all around, where their minds have to change. I can vary a drill in 20 seconds by moving a cone. Okay, now this guy's making that cut. Do we have it? Boom, and let's get that next rep going. I can vary rules of a game. That's one of my favorite ones. At times we play games with 2 end zones in the corner of the end zones, and that middle area is not a goal. And that's great for changing the point of attack. I can vary, one of my favorite ones, and I use this at the U23 tryouts each time, which is take a 5-pass shot clock. So 4 on 4, and you've got 40 yards to go or 35 yards to go, and you only get 5 passes to do it. And what that means is they have to take the first viable shot that comes up. They have to be a little bit indiscriminate, but they also have to work to find those shots for movement. So that's a great one for that theme, because you're not going to score many of those if you're taking a stall 8 shot from late in that, but you're going to get a lot of them if you can get it in flow. Someone going up line, like we would have taught in a pattern, and then he hits that shot. So you can vary the rules of the game to entice them, so that success from that game is only done if they can adhere to what your theme is, right? You can only win that game of 5 shots, five pass shot clock, if you're going to be able to take good shots from movement, if you're going to be able to attack aggressively upfield. So it can fit in a couple of different themes, but it's definitely not one that you want when you're trying to possess the disc and you're trying to teach that valuing of the disc. And if you're trying to maintain that possession, you have other games and you can vary them in different ways, where changing the scoring of a game based on which possession you scored it on. You get more points for the first one, less for a second. And and the other variation is to provide that provide that direction with the feedback. If we're ready to progress, I can talk about that next step. I can give feedback to the better players about that next step after their reps, and change a little bit of different feedback for that younger player that's still looking at the basics. Give him the very fundamental feedback, but challenge the advanced player with some more specific, more challenging feedback that's more appropriate to keep them challenged. And so, so I was going to go through a few, I kind of did it right now, but taking shots from movement and playing from a sideline are two of my favorite ones. So I wanted to talk about I'm going to leave this up and just talk about some of the other ways that I would build a theme through my different progressions. So for the box throwing, if you're going to warm up with some kind of throwing drill at times, and if you're looking to make aggressive throws and hucks, then you want to warm up with different drills than you want for your shorter give-go ones. In my box throwing drill, if we're looking to play quickly and change that point of attack, then we're going to have a lot of short throws in that drill. I'm going to be looking for a lot of those, and they're going to be a lot of cuts where someone's coming to you or with, in a small space. Whereas if we're looking at more of linking with the downfield, now I'm going to run things where we have more like 20-yard cuts, where someone's finding that space further away, or finding a thrower that's further away to cut for them. If I were looking for breaking the marks and getting it off of a sideline, I might really be focused on what I call the OEO throw, that outside in throw. If someone's forcing me forehand to throw with an outside in, but to that break side, I might use that. I might teach that one to them and work on that, because that's a very viable throw to the one in the stack out of a centered sack on the sideline. So my drill is going to be engaged with that theme, to the point where every part of it, each one of these is going to be tied. Each drill, every part of my instruction is going to be tied to that theme. My patterns will be similar as well. If I'm looking to take shots from movement, we're now going to have someone cutting deep, and we're going to have to provide feedback on the way that they're cutting, the way they're initiating that, their change of speed and change of direction on that, which is going to be very different from handler work where we're trying to coordinate with give-go cuts, right? So now my patterns for one is going to be a lot longer. I'm going to be tiring them out, and now I have different challenges when I exhaust them with deep cuts than if everything's give-go cuts around the disc and you're never going more than 20 yards, in one direction. I already talked about the games, but there's plenty of ways to create competitions or to vary. And some of the ones that I've liked are changing the scoring rules. You get 2 points if you score off of a throw more than half field on these small-sided games. That's a way to incite the throwing, to incentivize taking your shots from movement. And you can turn anything into a game. So some of them, I want to promote that success. So rather than making the competition be a game where after a turnover, the other team's going immediately, I want to get plenty of reps. So we'll go single possessions, and so your team's going to get 3 straight possessions on offense, and you get one possession. Or maybe after a turnover, you get the disc back and try it again, and you can score based on whether you score 1 point for scoring on the second possession, 2 for scoring on the first possession. And then you can keep that score over time. And so you can turn what would be just a drill into a competition, but also focused on providing the scoring and the rules for that competition to incentivize what you're trying to teach, what that theme is. And that's kind of the art of coaching, in my mind, is that structuring it so that when they succeed at what you're trying to do, they're learning the skill that you want. When they succeed at your drill, did they get better at your theme? When they win the game, did they win because or did they succeed more because they adhered to your theme and didn't just play the way they were playing, right? And all of this comes down to that we're trying to teach them to play differently than their natural habits. Everyone has their natural play, and if we were to just let them play, we would get mixed results but if we can get them to change some of their behaviors to be more team-oriented and play in a coordinated way with the rest of our players, then we can get more out of them. And so we want to be able to teach them and adjust their behavior, and the rules of our games are a way to do that. And I guess the next part, I really wanted to talk about the feedback. And feedback is crucial because I see that as the spark plug for the engine of player growth, right? Every time you give feedback, it sparks that fuel, their focus, redirects their focus, and you get another rep, another firing of the pistons, and churning of that engine of building your team. And so appropriate feedback is important. And so the best feedback, number one, is concise. And being in a theme allows you to get that concise feedback because the context is there, and I can say, hey, remember when, on this cut, we want to really make that cut sharp. We need a sharp angled cut. We can't curve that. Boom. And they can go do it. A big one that for taking shots from movement that I instruct is that I always want people to target above the waist and below the eyes. I use that language a lot. This is your target. Because if you can hit your receiver here, that means they can catch and they can deliver that next throw quicker than if they have to go down or have to go up or behind. But right here is that sweet spot where I can catch, transition to my throw, and deliver that throw using the speed. And so that might be the concise feedback that I would use very early in that day. I would be correcting that a lot until I was seeing everyone targeting that, and then I'd move on to something else. It needs to be relevant, and that's, again, where themes come in. If I'm going to correct something completely unrelated, I'm not getting much out of it. I'm not helping to change their behavior and to improve their skills. So I want to narrow my focus, and it needs to be very specific. Above the waist, below the eyes. That's my target. I want you to hit this, right? I want you to throw a fake and step out and throw a fake and then turn and throw that around throw. That's very specific. One of the skills that I had to work with high school players a lot is run in one direction and look in a different, right? Hey, when you're cutting deep, I want you to look over your shoulder, glance back, and see whether that throw is going up. I want you to see whether anything's changed. So being very specific with what you want, it is very easy also with a theme because you probably have already talked about everything that you're going to correct them on. So when you go to correct them, you're just pointing back to something that you already talked about, that you said to the group, most likely. You're not going to say, oh, I know we were working on that, but here's this other thing I want to tell you about. That there's already specific things that you can return to. Another one is that it's timely. After that rep, and they do another rep, you can't go back 2 reps. The kids don't have that on their stack, on their mental stack, especially not late into practice. They have a hard enough time if a single possession, if they lose possession and you go try to talk to them about their offense. So you have to get to them. And so my view is that my job as a coach is to get all that feedback to them and get it to them on time. It has to be informative. It has to give them everything they need to go do that rep right. And this is getting back to that point that they don't learn from your words, but from doing. I'm trying to correct their next rep. The next time they go do it, I want them to do it a little bit better and be a little more focused. And if I can get them to, if my feedback can make that next rep work right, then I did my job and that's all I can affect. So I want to give them all the information to do their next rep, the next time they go out and are in that same situation, what I want to see. And then skill level appropriate, especially at the high school level where you have such a mix of skills. Being able to challenge the top players with some feedback that would be above the heads of your beginner players, being able to give that to them, but still being able to dial yourself back down and say, these are the basics, and provide just as valuable feedback to those younger players, those newer players, in the same manner. That, hey, this is what I want to see you do. I really need to see you step with the correct pivot foot. I don't know how many times I had to teach that. Yeah, step out with that and throw that. Don't worry about the completion, don't worry about anything else. Focus on that. Let's get that one thing. Yep.
Before we move on, and we might be talking about this later, but that seems like it's very training environment focused. How do you then translate that onto game day or tournament day?
So this is mostly focused on training and themes in training. So I can talk about that afterwards, but that's kind of out of the scope of this. And so I'm just going to kind of run down. You probably have these, but I went through and kind of narrowed what kind of comments do I make in training, and critique with correction. Hey, when you made that throw, you didn't look at your reset handler first, to engage him, and I need you to do that. I need that corrective step. Something small, and then I let him go. And then the next rep happens, and maybe I see someone else do something else. Hey, you need to be on the balls of your feet. You need to do this. So that kind of critique, which is, you're not doing it right yet. I'm going to correct that with something simple, and you're going to go try it again. Acknowledging their correction. After they do it, having that in your mind that, hey, I told Billy that he needed to be on the balls of his feet, and the next time he was, and then I say, hey, that was great. That was a great rep because you did that. That's another type of feedback that's very positive and supportive and helps them, is when they do something right after correcting, acknowledge it. Encouraging their effort. And this comes up a lot at the beginning of a drill or one that's newer, that, hey, we're working on something that we're pushing our boundaries. Hey, that was great work. Hey, you almost got that one. Good job. I become the cheerleader at times of practices when we're struggling, and it's all about positive effort, positive focus. Hey, that was a great try. We're gonna make some mistakes with that, but we're learning and keeping them on that positive mindset. And my favorite one is the and one more thing. Hey, I'll often correct our drills by saying, hey, this is really running great. You know what? You guys are doing it so well. I can add one more thing because you've got it. And now I'm going to add one more thing for them to focus on. Now I'm going to add, I want you, instead of just taking off and doing that, I want you to set up this cut as if you were live in a game and simulating it. Instead of just starting from a stop and waiting till he moves and then I go, you kind of engage and you're drifting in and you're active and making it a little more realistic, a little more game-like. So I'll add one thing to it, or I'll add one more challenge. And my favorite one is to catch them being good. After they've been struggling, or when they do something exactly right, stopping and pointing it out is so powerful for those players that are beaming with pride, in a sense, from doing exactly right, especially when it's something complex and challenging. We're changing the point of attack, which is my language for dump swing, which is, but when we do that, when we finally get all of the actions and we link them all together and all the parts worked in a drill, that moment doesn't need to be long, but acknowledging that. And playing the highlight film is another thing that I'll often do with the whole team and say, hey, we're done with that, but I'm going to bring you guys in. And then you walk through a specific situation related to your theme where someone did something excellent and they're in that huddle and you're like, hey, you know what? That point Finn went out and he did this thing exactly right, and then we went to this and then it worked, and then he hit this guy and that was, and you just kind of walk through all the details of what people did right and let them acknowledge it, let them visualize what happened and say, oh yeah, that's exactly what we were just talking about in our theme. That was our shot from movement. And another one is to reiterate expectations. That you've probably said it before, but there are times where things aren't going well, and I'll stop that drill, stop that rep. Hey, let's bring our focus back with, this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to get out of it. This is the reason we're doing it. It's a nice little break with the reiterating of the expectations, and it allows you to disengage from some sloppy plays, from some mistakes, and get back to some more focused play. Yeah, so that was that last one. Stopping the drill to refocus on that. And so with that feedback, I kind of created a little game for myself that I play when I'm at practice, and it's a way to acknowledge when I'm providing good feedback. Because just like the players are trying to get better, I'm trying to get better as a coach. I'm trying to get better at inspiring and teaching them and getting results out of my team. And so I have a scoring system that I came out with, and you reiterate a previous point. When you do that, that's a +1. Yeah, that was good. I'm adding to my coaching cred every time I reiterate something. Right? When I provide that corrective feedback, hey, you're trying to do it this way, but we actually want you to do this way. We want you to do this. That's +1. Every time you stay on theme, it's +1. Corrective feedback that's on theme, that's worth 2. That's really good, right? Awesome. When you catch them being good, it's +1, and it's +1 more the harder it is for them to do it well, when it's more in the unstructured. It's easy to do it in a pattern when it's very scripted, but it's really hard to do it in a 4-on-4 or to do it in a 7-on-7 when there are no constraints and they have every aspect of the game that they're worried about, and that they still do what's on your theme. Encouraging, anything that's being encouraging for them, it's +1. Plus an extra 1 if you repeat your own team's vocabulary. And I'm a strong believer that you should have a language, and the terms that you use should have very specific meaning. That's why I use specific words like training. Why I use specific words like changing the point of attack, taking a shot. A shot has a very specific term to me, which is different than a huck. Taking a shot from movement, that phrase I use over and over to encourage them not to be taking those static shots when, from a standstill. So anytime you repeat your own vocabulary, you get an extra point on top. Corrective feedback that's on theme and use the words that I want them to be using, 3 points. Doing nothing is just below each one of those. Really good. That's also very good, right? Sitting and enjoying and watching, observing it. Not everything needs feedback. You can always help, but a lot of times, you know that player knew what he needed to do, and he doesn't really need that feedback. You can say nothing. And anytime you're long-winded, anytime it takes more than a sentence or two to get your point across, that was probably the wrong feedback. And that's the way I correct myself. I notice those. Anytime I'm explaining for too long at a practice, it's no good, right? I want to get them out because I'm keeping them from, I'm limiting their duration that they're getting their reps. I'm limiting the amount of time they're actually learning. And going off theme. Off theme is actually the worst. It probably should be -2. But it's thoroughly distracting from them. Once you get into the habit of this, it'll feel wrong to comment on something else. So definitely stay off from that. And I guess to sum it up, I wanted to give how do I measure my results besides that game? And I have one criteria. And my measure of coaching success is how much do your players love the game when they're done with you? When your time with them is over, do they love the game more? If so, then you did it right. And if not, you need to retool. You need to fix something about your game because it's an awesome game and your players should be loving this. So that's my talk. Those were things that I do at all of my practices, and I hope has some benefit to you guys with your teams. So thanks.